I'm joined now by Congressman Jamie Raskin. Congressman, thanks for your time.
I'm delighted to be with you, Brian.
So it looks like Kash Patel's luck might have run out a little bit. Can you explain the new investigation that you and your committee have just launched into him?
Well, it's the oldest story in the book. He's just looting public funds for private use. So he's been using a government jet for personal flights and lavish vacations. He's been taking his girlfriend on overnight dates on a $60 million government jet that's supposed to be used for government purposes. He's done a Scottish golfing excursion with his buddies, again on a government jet. He's taken a trip to a luxury hunting retreat called unbelievably Boondoggle Ranch, which I think of as the name of the whole scandal. I mean, basically, the guy who was the least qualified FBI director in history and has utterly politicized the department and turned it into a weapon against Trump's political enemies is just abusing all of the privileges of the office for personal use.
Now, in terms of the investigation itself, obviously Democrats are in the minority, and so to what extent can you investigate this without buy-in from Republicans? And I guess as a corollary to that, are there any Republicans who are joining in on this effort to investigate Kash Patel?
Well, we just got back after the little Thanksgiving recess, Brian, and so I've not had an opportunity yet to talk to the Republicans, but when we hit the floor this evening, I will definitely be approaching colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, people from the Oversight Committee, to see whether they would join us, because it's just a scandalous situation. And I think we need to raise the stakes for this kind of misconduct. Trump obviously sets a dreadful example for his administration by treating public property like private property and just bulldozing the White House and then deciding to, build out his big ballroom and taking a $400 million jet airplane from the Qataris and so on. So the rest of the administration gets the message. It's just like Mardi Gras, laissez les bon temps rouler, whatever, you can get away with it. And even though the Supreme Court, which is under Trump's spell, has given him certain kinds of immunities, those immunities don't extend to everybody else in the government, and we have to try to uphold the rule of law at every turn.
Best case scenario, what do you hope that this investigation will lead to?
Well, we want him to release all of the relevant information and all of the relevant documents. We want him to stop ripping off the taxpayers, but he's already shown himself basically to be unrepentant. And so Trump may end up getting rid of him, but that's not sufficient for us if other members of the administration continue to abuse their public offices for private gain. And again, that goes all the way up to the top. I mean, that starts with Donald Trump, but it certainly filtered down to a lot of the other members of his cabinet just as well, including Secretary Noem at Homeland Security, and a bunch of the other ones are engaged in the same kind of misconduct and exploitation of office.
I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to read this, but there's a new report out from active duty and retired FBI agents, and it kind of shows that what you're investigating Kash Patel for is a small part of a larger whole. There was an instance where Kash Patel, it was the day after Charlie Kirk had been shot and killed, went out to Provo to begin the investigation and wouldn't leave the plane until he got an FBI jacket. And then even still, once he got an FBI jacket from a female member of the FBI, wouldn't leave the plane until he was able to borrow some patches from other FBI agents that wouldn't leave him patchless, where there were spaces on his jacket to put those patches on. And so it really goes to show that what he's using the office for is not to lead first as a law enforcement agent, but rather to get himself Instagrammable moments and to make sure that he's the center of attention. I don't know whether he wants to use this to launch himself into some, big glossy social media career in the aftermath of this. But in any case, what was your reaction to hearing a little bit about that report that came from active duty and retired FBI agents?
It's all spectacle, performance, entertainment for them. Meantime, he's been doing everything in his power to cover up Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and the
Right.
crimes that took place as part of that massive international billion-dollar global sex trafficking ring, and child abuse ring. So he said he wanted all the documents released when they were running, and they got in, and he's doing everything he can to sweep all of it under the rug and to call it a Democrat hoax, along with Donald Trump. Meantime, they're taking the taxpayers for a ride in every way, using the jet planes for their romantic dates, for their buddy golf weekends, for all of their boondoggle ranch outings. Uh, and they're not serving the American people. It's just a complete performance. The good news, Brian, is that Trump is sinking like a stone in the polls. And so he'll probably end up purging a bunch of these people who are basically just imitating him because their crimes are so glaring and so obvious. In the meantime, he's in league with every, corrupt mob state leader around the world, and is in the process of pardoning Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who's a convicted cocaine trafficker who was bringing cocaine into America, 400 tons of cocaine, 800,000 pounds of cocaine he was bringing in. And Trump is going to pardon him because he's another right-wing dictator
Right.
who has all the right friends in the Trump circles, while they're just blowing up boats, in Latin America at the high seas, saying these people are narco traffickers without bringing any charges, without any due process at all, without any declaration of war. So it doesn't make sense either as a legitimate act of war or as a legitimate act of police enforcement. So it's just an utterly lawless, careening sequence of events that we're witnessing.
On that point, really quick, there was concern over the weekend that Pete Hegseth was the one who ordered that second strike. And of course, the second strike would be the one that would be constituted as a war crime because, within the manual that our own military adheres to, it gives the example of if someone is shipwrecked for some reason, that's a legitimate justification to not attack them or to not kill them, and that's exactly what happened. It seemed this afternoon that blame had been diffused off of Pete Hegseth and onto somebody below him. And so, what was your reaction to seeing what very much looks like an effort to protect Pete Hegseth?
Right. Well, even if the original attacks on the so-called drug boats were legitimate acts of war, which I think clearly they were not, but even assuming they were, the so-called second tap, attacking the people who now were hanging on for dear life to the wreckage of the boat, was a war crime. It is a war crime to attack people who are survivors, who are defenseless, and have no military recourse. It's just like killing prisoners of war. It's killing people who no longer are a threat. So even if you assume, I think against all the evidence, that the original tap was a lawful effort just to destroy a drug boat that we were at war with, even though Congress hasn't declared any war and there are no military hostilities, the attack on the desperate survivors who are trying to hang on to the flotsam and jetsam and wreckage of the boat is clearly a war crime. It's either a war crime if you're using a military paradigm, or it's murder if you're thinking of it as law enforcement.
Yeah.
Because these people, again, were constituting no threat to anyone.
Do you think that this administration had covered up for Hegseth so that they could preserve him while still throwing somebody below him under the bus?
Well, we're waiting to see. We're trying to find that out. I mean, scandalously, the administration has been defending these non-international law hostilities. I mean, they're coming up with the most tortured neologistic
Yeah.
syntaxes
Right. It's
to
just
try to
murder. It's
defend
just
what.
murder at the high seas. That's basically what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an act of war. Congress hasn't declared war. We're not in active military hostilities. They say we think that's a drug boat. We don't know who's on it, but we think everybody who's on it is guilty, and we're just going to blow up the drug boat. And then when two people survive the wreckage, kill all of them. Is putatively,
Yeah.
allegedly, one of the orders that came down. So we've got to get to the bottom of this because, of course, the logic of these attacks is unlimited. In other words, if this is allowed at the high seas, why is it not just allowed on the highways of America?
Right. Right.
Um, and if they can go without a declaration of war from Congress, without any military provocation, and without any proof that these are drug dealers, why can't they just blow up trucks that are driving down a highway?
Yep.
Right. And so you can see how there's an infinitely elastic logic to what they're doing. And when it merges with the deployment of military against Los Angeles and Portland and Chicago and DC, it's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we'll finish off with this. You had mentioned before the extent to which Kash Patel and, of course, by association, Donald Trump are involved in this cover-up of the Epstein files. You have pushed forward a measure, or introduced a measure that's intended to put a bunch of Republicans on record here as it relates to the prospective pardon of Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, look, Donald Trump pardoned 1,600 convicted January 6thers, which included hundreds of people who violently assaulted police officers. He did it on the first day of his administration, so the new Congress had no opportunity to say anything. They are clearly involved in very elaborate relationship and seduction of Ghislaine Maxwell. All she has to do is utter the right words, and then she gets transferred out of a higher security, tougher prison to a prison camp in Texas with a very gentle environment. And even there, she gets treated to some extraordinary perks and
Yeah.
differential treatment. She gets room service in her cell. She gets to work out and have exercise privileges when she wants to. She can have visitors come in who get to use computers, unlike all the other visitors. And she appears to be involved in a commutation application. So she's setting up her pardon, commutation, clemency action from the Trump administration. We know about it. We in Congress have got to act now. And so that is the purpose of this resolution, putting Congress on record as opposing any clemency for the convicted child sex trafficker and offender, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was sentenced in Judge Allie Nathan's courtroom to 20 years in prison for recruiting and grooming and prostituting children across state lines, participating in the trafficking and the abuse of the children. If anybody is unqualified for a pardon, it's got to be Ghislaine Maxwell,
Yeah.
who refused to testify at her trial, refused to own up to her crimes, has been completely unrepentant, has been completely unremorseful, continues to lie about the girls and the women who were abused, continues to denigrate the victims and disparage the victims of her crimes and Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. And she continues to deny that Epstein engaged in any sexual offenses against children. Why should she be pardoned? So that strikes me as an elementary moral and legal proposition, and we should all put our names to it. And if you voted to release all the Epstein files, certainly you should be voting also to say there should be no pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell.
In terms of getting this resolution on the floor, which is obviously important, getting these members of Congress on record in terms of where they stand on this issue. Do you have to rely on Mike Johnson to bring it to the floor? Is there some other avenue that can force this resolution to be voted on?
Well, remember, this is what we did with the discharge petition. I would hope that we would immediately get all the Democrats on it, and we would get at least all of the Republicans who co-sponsored the discharge petition, but really all of them who want to take a stand against this, because the rumors are that Donald Trump could decide to issue a Christmas pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell. This would be some act of charity that would obviously cement her determination to testify that she saw no wrong from Jeffrey Epstein and no wrong from Donald Trump and anybody else that the Trump administration is trying to protect. Remember, Trump had dispatched the number 2 at the Department of Justice, the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, to go and meet with her the day after she was subpoenaed to come testify before Congress and the Oversight Committee. And he went there not to get names from her about who the abusers and perpetrators were, not to figure out the full scope and dimension of this massive child sex trafficking conspiracy, but rather to make sure that she would not say anything untoward about Donald Trump.
It's pretty amazing that Republicans have been claiming to be battling this war on Christmas for the last 20 years. And finally, they win. They've got full control of government, House, Senate, White House. It's their moment to really bathe in the sacrosanctity of the holiday season. And what might Trump be considering doing? Releasing a pedophile's accomplice from prison. Really puts everything on full display there. With that said, Congressman, appreciate all the work that you're doing here and for your time today.
Great being with you, Brian. Hang tough.